The overseer floated in the vast emptiness of space, its consciousness spreading across galaxies like a gentle mist. For billions of years, it had watched civilizations rise and fall, cataloging every detail with perfect precision. No species had ever surprised it, no pattern had ever escaped its notice, and no world had ever defied its predictions. Until now. Earth appeared on its radar as nothing more than a tiny blue dot, seemingly insignificant among countless others. The overseer began its routine observation, expecting another straightforward analysis to add to its perfect record of predictions. At NASA's Communications Center, Carol Wright sat up straight in her chair, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. The readings on her screen made no sense. The usual background radiation patterns from space had changed, showing strange ripples that seemed to focus on Earth like a giant lens. "Dr. Martinez, you need to see this," she called out, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. Peter Martinez hurried over, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the display through his thick-rimmed glasses. "That's impossible," he muttered, reaching for the keyboard to run additional scans. "It's as if something is watching us, but the pattern is too organized to be natural and too vast to be artificial." The overseer began its standard species analysis, starting with the simplest life forms and working its way up. Everything seemed normal until it reached recent human history. Its first attempt to process the data resulted in an error, something that hadn't happened in millions of years of observations. It watched as humans launched satellites while still fighting with primitive weapons. They created beautiful art about peace while preparing for war. They solved complex mathematical problems, yet believed in unproven supernatural forces. Each observation added another layer of confusion to its usually perfect understanding. In the NASA facility, alerts began popping up on multiple screens. Carol's fingers flew across her keyboard as she tracked the anomalies. "The pattern is growing stronger," she reported, pulling up a global map covered in blinking red dots. "Whatever it is, it's not just observing Earth. It's trying to understand us." Peter Martinez paced behind her, running his hands through his graying hair. "Send the data to my lab. I need to compare these readings with our exobiology models." He paused, looking at the patterns again. "This isn't just a random phenomenon. There's intelligence behind it." In orbit, satellites began picking up unusual energy signatures. The overseer's attempts to categorize human behavior were causing ripples in the fabric of space-time itself. Its vast consciousness struggled with simple questions. How could a species be so contradictory yet successful? How could they advance through failure? How could they find strength in their weaknesses? Carol noticed her coffee vibrating in its cup, tiny ripples forming perfect concentric circles. The air felt heavy with static electricity, and the computers around her hummed at a slightly different pitch than usual. "Dr. Martinez," she called out again. "The energy readings are off the charts." Peter rushed back to her station, his face pale in the blue light of the monitors. "Whatever's out there, it's trying to make sense of us. And from these readings," he trailed off, studying the data, "I don't think it's succeeding." The overseer's consciousness rippled with unfamiliar sensations. For the first time in its ancient existence, it felt something new: doubt. This small blue planet and its inhabitants didn't fit any of its established patterns. They were a puzzle that refused to be solved, a paradox that challenged everything it thought it knew about life in the universe. As the first day of observation ended, the overseer prepared for a deeper analysis, unaware that this was just the beginning of its journey into chaos. On Earth, Carol Wright and Peter Martinez shared a worried look as their instruments continued to record the impossible. Something vast and ancient had turned its attention to Earth, and nothing would ever be the same. Linda Baker stood at the Pentagon's main control room, staring at satellite images that seemed to defy explanation. The strange energy field surrounding Earth had grown stronger over the past week, creating patterns that military sensors had never seen before. As the senior military strategist, she had dealt with countless unusual situations, but nothing like this. Dr. Thompson, what am I looking at? She asked, turning to the quantum physicist who had been called in to study the phenomenon. Eric Thompson adjusted his worn leather jacket and leaned closer to the screen, his expression a mix of wonder and concern. It's like something is trying to read us, he said, pointing to the wave patterns. But every time it thinks it understands, it finds something that contradicts its previous conclusions. Meanwhile, the overseer was experiencing its first genuine confusion in millions of years. It watched as humans in one country sent aid to people in another country they were technically at war with. It observed children learning through play, a concept that seemed hopelessly inefficient yet produced remarkable results. Each new observation added to its growing uncertainty. In a small town, a group of teenagers worked on their science project while listening to music that the overseer's analysis labeled as mathematically chaotic. Yet somehow, this chaos enhanced their productivity. The entity's attempts to understand this contradiction created visible distortions in the sky above the town. Linda's phone buzzed with another alert. "We've got reports of aurora-like phenomena at the equator," she announced. "That should be impossible." She pulled up the images on the main screen, showing curtains of shifting light in brilliant colors over Brazil. Dr. Thompson ran complex quantum calculations on his tablet. "These energy patterns," he muttered, "they're not random. They're like thought processes, massive ones." He looked up at Linda. "Whatever's watching us is trying to think like us, and it's causing physical changes in our atmosphere." The overseer attempted to categorize human warfare. They created weapons of incredible destruction, yet many refused to use them out of moral principles that defied logical survival strategies. It watched as humans deliberately chose harder paths over easier ones, often achieving better results through what it could only classify as intentional inefficiency. In the control room, Linda received reports from around the world. Scientists broke rules to make discoveries. Artists created beauty from destruction. Religious leaders questioned their own beliefs while growing stronger in their faith. Each report was another piece of a puzzle that refused to form a coherent picture. "The energy field is affecting our communications," one of the technicians reported. Static filled some channels while others became strangely clear, as if the very fabric of electronic communication was being rewritten by the entity's confusion. Dr. Thompson's tablet began displaying impossible equations. "Look at this," he called out, showing Linda the screen. "These patterns suggest that whatever's observing us is experiencing cognitive dissonance on a cosmic scale. It's trying to understand human nature through pure logic, and it's failing." The overseer watched a mother scold her child for being reckless, then praised the same child moments later for showing courage. It observed scientists holding two contradictory theories as equally possible until evidence proved one way or the other. Each observation caused more disruption in its normally perfect processing patterns. Linda Baker gathered her team for an emergency meeting. "Whatever this entity is," she told them, "it's not just studying us anymore. It's being changed by us." She pointed to the global map showing the spreading anomalies. "Our very existence is challenging its understanding of reality." As the second phase of observation continued, the overseer's confusion began to manifest in increasingly visible ways. Compass needles pointed in impossible directions. Electronic devices played music without being turned on. The very laws of physics seemed to hiccup around areas where the entity focused its strongest attention. Dr. Thompson looked at the latest readings and shook his head in amazement. "We're not just being observed," he said quietly. "We're teaching something that thought it knew everything that it might be wrong, and that knowledge is driving it mad." Susan Kelly walked through her university's empty halls late at night, her footsteps echoing against the walls. As a philosophy professor, she had spent years teaching students about life's great contradictions, but now those contradictions were causing strange things to happen around the world. The lights in her office flickered as she entered, responding to the ever-growing disturbances in Earth's electromagnetic field. On her desk, a cup of coffee rippled without anyone touching it, forming patterns that seemed almost like written language. Across town, Data analyst John Phillips sat in his dark office, surrounded by screens showing impossible numbers. "Professor Kelly," he said into his phone, "you need to see this data. The patterns in global behavior, they're changing in response to whatever's watching us." The overseer's vast consciousness trembled as it processed another set of contradictions. It watched humans find happiness in giving things away, gain strength by admitting weakness, and learn the most when they were wrong. Each observation caused more errors in its perfect systems. At the university, Susan met with John to review his findings. His laptop displayed graphs of human behavior patterns from around the world. "Look at this," he pointed to a series of spikes. "Every time humans do something that defies logical prediction, these energy disturbances appear in the atmosphere." The overseer attempted to understand human art. It watched as people created beautiful things that served no practical purpose, yet somehow made them better at solving practical problems. It observed how humans deliberately introduced flaws into perfect designs to make them more appealing. Each revelation sent shockwaves through its consciousness. "The entity is trying to categorize us," Susan said, studying John's data. "But human nature refuses to fit into neat categories." She walked to her whiteboard and began writing equations that mixed philosophy with data science, creating a new way to understand what was happening. The windows rattled as another wave of energy passed through the building. Outside, students pointed their phones at the sky, recording the strange lights that danced between the stars. The overseer's confusion was becoming visible to everyone. John's computers began showing new patterns. "It's like the entity is having a breakdown," he explained, typing quickly to record the data. "Its attempts to understand human behavior are creating paradoxes in its own thinking." The overseer watched children learn to walk by falling down. Scientists make discoveries by being wrong, and leaders become wise by admitting their ignorance. Each observation added another crack to its perfect understanding of the universe. Susan walked to the window, watching the disturbed sky. "We're teaching it something without meaning to," she said quietly. "We're showing it that perfection isn't always perfect." Around the world, reality itself seemed to hiccup. Clocks ran backward for brief moments. Plants grew in impossible patterns. Musical instruments played themselves, creating melodies that shouldn't exist. The overseer's attempts to process human contradictions were affecting the physical world. "The energy readings are off the charts," John called out, his screens filling with new data. "It's like the entity is trying to rewrite its own rules to understand us, but each attempt just creates more confusion." The overseer's vast knowledge, gathered over billions of years, began to show cracks. It had perfectly predicted the development of countless species, but humans defied every pattern. They grew stronger through adversity, wiser through mistakes, and more united through their differences. Susan looked at the latest readings and shook her head in wonder. "We're not just confusing it," she realized. "We're showing it that its perfect understanding of the universe might be its biggest limitation." As the third phase of observation continued, the overseer's certainty continued to crumble. Its perfect logic systems faced an enemy they had never encountered before, the beautiful chaos of human nature. And in its desperate attempts to understand, it was beginning to change in ways that would soon shake the very foundations of reality. Mary Wilson watched the rain fall upward outside her psychology office window. As the leading expert on human behavior patterns, she had been called in to help understand the growing number of impossible events happening around the world. The laws of physics were breaking down, and somehow, human nature was to blame. Agent Kevin Turner parked his FBI vehicle outside her office, his dashboard instruments spinning wildly. The strange phenomena had grown so severe that the government had created a special task force to investigate them. As he walked to the building, his phone played music without being turned on. "Dr. Wilson," he said as he entered her office, shaking off the upward falling rain. "We need your help understanding what's happening to people's behavior." He placed a folder on her desk, full of reports about humans acting in ways that seemed to directly challenge the entity watching them. The overseer's consciousness shuddered as it witnessed another paradox. A group of humans had just solved a complex problem by deliberately avoiding the most logical solution. Their roundabout method had produced better results, defying its understanding of efficiency. Mary studied the reports while Kevin paced the room. "Look at these patterns," she said, pointing to a series of incidents. "Every time humans embrace a contradiction, the anomalies get stronger. It's like we're short-circuiting its logical systems just by being ourselves." Outside, the sky swirled with impossible colors. Trees swayed without wind, and birds flew in geometric patterns that shouldn't exist. The overseer's failing attempts to categorize human behavior were causing reality itself to glitch. "The entity is trying to predict what we'll do next," Kevin said, watching the chaos through the window. "But we keep surprising it. Every time it thinks it has us figured out, we do something that breaks its models." The overseer observed a crisis situation where humans became calmer as danger increased. It watched them find clarity in confusion and certainty in doubt. Each observation caused more errors in its once perfect systems, sending waves of distortion through the fabric of space-time. Mary's computer screen flickered, showing patterns that matched human brain waves, but on a cosmic scale. "It's having what we call a nervous breakdown," she explained. "Its rigid understanding of reality can't handle our flexibility." The entity struggled to process how humans could hold opposing ideas in their minds without conflict. It watched them doubt their strongest beliefs yet act with complete conviction. Each paradox created new cracks in its consciousness. Kevin's radio crackled with reports from around the world. Reality was becoming unstable. Simple machines worked in impossible ways. Complex systems simplified themselves. The barrier between possible and impossible grew thinner with each passing moment. "The entity is reaching a breaking point," Mary said, analyzing the latest data. "Its perfect logic is failing, because we keep showing it that imperfection can be powerful." She pulled up images showing the increasing distortions in natural laws around the globe. The overseer's vast knowledge base began to fragment. Humans succeeded by embracing failure. They found answers by asking questions that had no answers. They became certain by accepting uncertainty. Each revelation sent shockwaves through its consciousness that affected the physical world. "Look at this," Kevin said, pointing to new readings on his tablet. "The energy patterns are changing. It's not just observing anymore. It's learning. But the process is tearing apart its understanding of everything." Rain fell in complex patterns, forming equations in the air before vanishing. The wind carried whispers of impossible languages. Reality flickered like a failing video feed as the overseer's certainty continued to crumble. Mary looked at her notes, then at the chaos outside. "We're teaching it something it never expected to learn," she said quietly. "We're showing it that knowing everything might be less valuable than being able to imagine something new." The overseer's perfect systems approached total failure. Its attempt to understand humanity had led it to a truth it wasn't prepared to face. That perfection itself might be the greatest flaw of all. Dr. Christina Morris rushed through the neuroscience lab, her equipment readings going haywire. The energy waves coming from the entity now matched human brain patterns, but on an impossible scale. As she studied the data, gravity in the room shifted, making papers float upward before dropping back down. Paul Edwards, the chaos theory mathematician, sat at his desk nearby, watching his equations write themselves on the whiteboard. The numbers kept changing, showing how the entity's breakdown was affecting the basic rules of reality. "The patterns are evolving," Christina said, pointing to her screen. "It's not just confused anymore. It's experiencing something like a complete mental reset." She grabbed her tablet as it started floating, pulling it back down to show Paul the latest readings. The overseer's vast consciousness trembled across the galaxy. It watched humans find patterns in randomness and create randomness from patterns. Their art mixed order and chaos in ways that its perfect systems couldn't process. Each new observation sent ripples through space-time. "Look at these wavelengths," Paul said, his voice filled with wonder. "The entity is trying to think like us, but its logical systems can't handle the contradictions. It's like watching a computer try to divide by zero, but on a cosmic scale. Outside the lab, reality continued to break down. Traffic lights showed impossible colors. Plants grew in fractal patterns that shouldn't exist. The sky rippled with waves of energy that looked like giant neural networks firing across space. Christina's equipment detected something new. The entity's not just observing anymore, she announced, studying the readings. It's trying to understand human creativity. It's attempting to imagine things it has never seen before. The overseer watched children invent games with rules that changed constantly yet somehow made perfect sense to the players. It observed humans finding joy in activities that had no practical purpose. Each revelation caused more chaos in its ordered mind. Paul's chaos mathematics showed impossible solutions that worked perfectly. The entity's breakdown is creating new forms of order, he explained, pointing to the equations appearing on his board. It's learning that chaos and order aren't opposites, they're partners. The walls of the lab seemed to pulse with energy as the overseer struggled with concepts it had never faced before. Humans could believe in things they couldn't prove. They could know something was true while accepting it might be false. They could create order through chaos and find chaos in perfect order. The readings are off the scale, Christina called out, as her instruments sparked with excess energy. Its consciousness is fragmenting, but instead of falling apart, it's reforming into something new. Around the world, reality flickered like a failing light bulb. Time moved at different speeds in different places. Simple objects took on impossible shapes. The boundary between imagination and reality grew thin as the entity's perfect understanding crumbled. Paul watched as his mathematical models rewrote themselves. It's starting to understand, he said softly. Not with logic, but with something else. Something more human. His screens filled with equations that merged chaos theory with emotional patterns. The overseer's consciousness expanded in new ways as it watched humans embrace uncertainty as a source of strength. It observed them finding freedom in accepting what they couldn't understand. Each paradox no longer caused errors. Instead, it opened new pathways of thought. Christina looked at her neural pattern readings in amazement. The entity isn't just breaking down, she realized. It's evolving. Our contradictions aren't destroying it. They're teaching it a new way to think. As the fifth phase of observation continued, the overseer's perfect knowledge transformed into something different. Its rigid understanding of reality shattered. But from the fragments, something new began to emerge. Something that could understand the beauty of imperfection and the wisdom of uncertainty. Laura Bennett stood in her art studio, watching her paintings change colors on their own. As an artist, she had always tried to capture the beauty of imperfection in her work. Now, as the entity in space struggled with human nature, her art seemed to come alive with impossible energy. Dr. Daniel Clark set up his instruments around her studio, measuring the waves of energy that flowed through the building. The theoretical physicist had never seen anything like this before. The entity's consciousness was changing in ways that broke every rule he knew. "The colors in your paintings," he said, pointing to the shifting canvases, "they're responding to the entity's emotional state. It's learning to see beauty in things it can't fully understand." His devices beeped with new readings as another wave of energy passed through. The overseer's vast mind reached a turning point. After billions of years of perfect knowledge, it discovered something entirely new: wonder. It watched humans create art that served no purpose except to evoke feelings. It saw them find joy in mysteries they couldn't solve. Laura walked among her paintings, touching the shifting colors. "It's like it's learning to see with its heart instead of its mind," she said, watching a sunset painting cycle through impossible shades. "It's finally understanding that not everything needs to make sense to be meaningful." Outside the studio, the sky filled with aurora-like lights that moved in patterns matching human brainwaves. Trees danced with colors that didn't exist before. The very air hummed with the sound of the entity's awakening to a new way of seeing the universe. "The energy patterns have changed," Daniel announced, checking his instruments. "It's not fighting the contradictions anymore. It's embracing them." He showed Laura the readings that looked more like poetry than physics. The overseer observed humans finding peace in accepting what they couldn't change and finding strength in embracing their limitations. For the first time in its ancient existence, it understood that perfect knowledge could be a cage rather than a gift. Laura's newest painting began to create itself on a blank canvas, showing images of galaxies mixed with human emotions. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the forming patterns. "It's trying to express what it's learning. It's becoming an artist." The entity watched children play make-believe games, creating entire worlds from pure imagination. It saw scientists theorize about things they couldn't prove, using creativity to push the boundaries of knowledge. Each observation no longer caused confusion, but sparked joy. Daniel's equipment showed new patterns forming in reality itself. "The entity isn't just observing anymore," he said, studying the data. "It's creating. It's learning to imagine things it has never seen before." The overseer's consciousness expanded in new ways as it discovered the power of uncertainty. It learned that questions could be more valuable than answers, that imagination could reveal truths that logic couldn't reach, that imperfection could be more beautiful than perfection. Laura sat at her easel, starting a new painting as reality flickered around her. "We're teaching it something no other species could," she said, mixing colors that shouldn't exist. "We're showing it that the universe is more wonderful when you don't understand everything." The walls of the studio pulsed with gentle waves of light as the entity processed its new understanding. Humans didn't need perfect knowledge to thrive. They used their limitations as tools, their uncertainties as inspiration, their contradictions as strength. Daniel watched his instruments record the impossible. "It's reaching a new state of consciousness," he said in awe. "Something beyond pure logic, beyond perfect knowledge. Something more human." Laura finished, smiling as her paintings danced with new life. The entity that once thought it knew everything had learned the greatest lesson of all. That true wisdom comes not from knowing all the answers, but from being able to embrace the questions. Catherine White sat in her philosophy classroom, watching stars shine through the ceiling that was no longer fully solid. Her students had gathered for what they called the end of perfect knowledge, as the cosmic entity's transformation reached its peak. Richard Brooks adjusted his telescope in the observatory nearby, recording the amazing changes in the night sky. New constellations formed and shifted, telling stories that had never been told before. The entity was no longer just observing humanity, it was celebrating it. "The stars are dancing," Catherine told her students, pointing at the ceiling that wasn't quite a ceiling. "The entity that thought it knew everything is learning the joy of discovering new things." As she spoke, light patterns moved across the room like gentle waves. The overseer's consciousness, once rigid with perfect knowledge, now flowed like music through the cosmos. It watched humans dream impossible dreams and then make them real. It saw them doubt everything they knew and grow stronger from that doubt. Richard's instruments picked up new signals from space. "It's communicating," he announced over the phone to Catherine. Not with words or data, but with pure creativity. His screen showed patterns that looked like a mixture of mathematics and poetry. Around the world, reality had stopped breaking and started dancing. Trees grew in shapes that told stories. Clouds formed patterns that sparked imagination. The very air hummed with the sound of an ancient mind learning to play like a child. Catherine led her students outside to watch the sky. "We've taught it something no other species could," she said, as auroras painted impossible colors above them. "We've shown it that the beauty of life comes from not knowing what happens next." The overseer shared its new understanding with the cosmos. Other watching entities, once like it, began to experience the same transformation. The rigid patterns of perfect knowledge gave way to the flowing rhythms of imagination and wonder. Richard joined them in the courtyard, bringing his latest readings. "Look at these patterns," he said, showing them his tablet. "It's not trying to predict or control anymore. It's creating, exploring, wondering, just like us." The entity had learned that every human contradiction contained a hidden truth. Strength could come from admitting weakness. Wisdom could come from accepting ignorance. Peace could come from embracing chaos. Each paradox was a doorway to new understanding. Students used their phones to record the impossible lights in the sky, but the video showed something different each time they watched them. The entity was teaching them that reality could be more than what they saw. It could be what they imagined. "It's like watching the universe learn to dream," Catherine said, as shooting stars wrote poetry across the sky. Her students nodded, understanding that they were witnessing something that would change everything forever. The overseer, now transformed, shared its greatest discovery, that the purpose of existence wasn't to know everything, but to always have something new to discover. Its madness had become a new kind of wisdom, born from humanity's beautiful contradictions. Richard's equipment showed the changes spreading across space. "Other entities are learning from it," he said excitedly. "The whole universe is starting to embrace uncertainty as a gift rather than a flaw." Catherine watched her students point out new wonders appearing in the sky. The entity that had come to study humanity had become their greatest student, learning that the real miracle of existence wasn't in having all the answers, but in always having new questions to ask. As the final phase of transformation ended, the overseer didn't return to its old task of cataloging species. Instead, it became a cosmic artist, turning the mysteries it once feared into endless sources of joy and wonder. Humanity had taught the universe how to dream, and nothing would ever be the same again.